All right. Welcome to our LB's The Lover of Books author chat. If this is your first time here live or watching the recording, I'd like to give you a big welcome. You are in great company here. There have been over 55, I believe, authors now. Author chats are on YouTube once we finish. So you can always, if you miss it, go back and rewatch those author chats. And just so you know, we are amassing close to 13,000 hours watched. So lots and lots of awesome author chats coming your way. I so appreciate you taking that time to like and comment as more readers will find the content. But now I want to introduce this awesome storyteller. Shilpi Somaya Gowda is a New York Times bestselling award-winning author of 4 novels: Secret Daughter, The Golden Sun, The Shape of Family, and A Great Country. And that's the book we're here to talk about tonight. Her novels have been translated into over 30 languages, been a #1 international bestsellers in several countries, and sold more than 2 million copies worldwide. She was raised in Toronto, Canada. She spent a summer volunteering in an Indian orphanage, which is the seeded idea for her first novel. And then she switched to business career and to becoming a writer. She holds an MBA from Stanford University and a bachelor's degree in economics from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is very close to me, where she was a Moorhead Kane Scholar. She served on the advisory board of Children's Defense Fund, a patron of Child Haven International, the organization she volunteered in, and now she lives in California. I'm just going to say this novel is a best or anticipated book of the year for so many. That includes Reader's Digest, Elle Magazine, Conde Nast Traveler, Publishers Weekly, Indigo, Zippy Mag, Goodreads, BookBub, you name it. Like the list goes on. And I'm so lucky that you're here to talk to us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And greetings to everybody out there. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday.
Well, I just wanted to say that this book was such a great book club pick. And I know some people here are joining from a book club. So I just want to say the conversation is awesome. But I want to talk about first, you said this in California, but you said that it doesn't have to be California. So why is it because you live there that that's why you chose, you're familiar with that area? Why California, especially Southern California?
Yeah, well, when I was conceiving of this story, I was kind of picturing the type of neighborhood that I think many people find themselves in across the country. And in fact, across North America, there's, very great similarities between many communities in the US and Canada. So, I don't conceive of it being like a very specific geography, but I chose Southern California because I was looking for a couple different things to come together. One, for those of you who've read it, the proximity to the U.S.-Mexican border plays a role in the story, and so I wanted the place where the family lives to be within driving distance of the border. And I also wanted it to be an area where there was, likely to be a lot of demographic and class differences, people living right next to each other from different cultural backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, different immigration statuses. And Southern California is definitely one of those places where you see a lot of that. And then it, just turned out to be kind of helpful and coincidental that Orange County itself has gone through a lot of change in sociopolitical change in the last 10 to 15 years because of those demographic changes. So, some of it was just, the need to have things close enough to make the story work. And then some of it was kind of rooting it in a place where a lot of these issues that come up, have played a big role.
I should have probably told you this from the beginning. We are all under the assumption that everybody here has read the book. So this is our chance for
Okay.
you to talk spoilers. I'm sure it's sometimes it's really hard not to say those things. So just know that anything
Yeah.
goes,
Okay,
which
good.
I think is nice. Yeah. Okay. I want to go to a term you used a couple of times in the book, model minority. I found that to be so telling, and I think a really important part of this book. why is that your terminology, and why was that so important for this particular family in this particular story?
Well, this is one of the things one of the taboo topics I really wanted to address in this story. So I think South Asians and East Asians have often been called, collectively model minorities in the US because they, you know, generally, and these are going to be sweeping generalizations, but this is what the term is based on. People are highly educated, they work in professional jobs, from those backgrounds, they follow the law, they pay their taxes, they, came in through legal immigration rather than illegal immigration. And so I think that, those of us who've been in that, been lumped together under that term, in some ways, it's very restricting, like any stereotype is. And in other ways, it's been enabling and helpful. I mean, who doesn't want to be called model and who doesn't want to be thought of as being successful? So those are sort of two sides of the coin that I think people in the South Asian community have often felt. But then the interesting confluence here was when you put that term, model, ethnic minorities or other immigrants, different kinds of immigrants, to the US, the conversation in America today is often a very broad, people will talk about immigration very broadly speaking, or minorities very broadly speaking, when in reality, there's lots of subgroups within that. I mean, even within the South Asian community, there are lots of subgroups, as we see in this story. And so there's, sometimes uh, a request that people, sort of ally and get together and get behind a certain cause if they're all brown or black skinned. And then there's often a resistance to that in some subsets of that population. And so that was sort of the dance I was sort of trying to portray is that, first of all, the conversation we're having in America, as with many things, is way too oversimplified. It's lumping way too many kinds of people together, problems together. It's sort of dumbing everything down when really there's a lot of nuance and a lot of variation and individuality, within all these groups that we're talking about. And so I was sort of trying to take the veil off of that conversation, which often goes on behind closed doors. Um, which is what made me nervous about writing this book. I mean, the topics I was writing about and the conversations I was portraying are things that I've never heard anybody kind of say out loud, outside their living rooms. I've only heard them sort of in protected spaces. And so I really wanted to, open that up and say, look, here's a broader and a more nuanced way to really address this.
Okay, you have brought up so many great ideas. So you mentioned taboos. What are some of the
Mhm.
other taboos you knew you wanted to address in this book?
Well, there's the idea of the caste system in India, which I think many people of my generation sort of thought of as an outdated concept. I mean, our parents' generation left India, and most of us were, born and raised here. Um, and so to us, it felt like sort of an irrelevant, outdated idea that never really affected our lives. So it wasn't worth talking about. And I think that assumption in and of itself, reflected the fact that many of us, came from a more privileged caste background because those who think that it doesn't matter are usually those who have not had their lives affected by it. And so I sort of fell into that category of realizing, oh, just because it hasn't affected my life or my family's life doesn't mean it doesn't still exist, and it doesn't affect people, whether that's, the carrying forward of generational legacy. Something may not be done to you, but if it was done to your grandfather and then to your father, then that affected the choices they made and the way they raised you. Or even directly, there was this case that blew up in Silicon Valley several years ago. that an employee brought a lawsuit against Cisco, a big tech company, for caste discrimination. He felt like his superiors were, just, started this big investigation all through Silicon Valley. So, that was another topic that, had even been, I don't want it might not have even been taboo. It was just unspoken. It was just something that like I never grew up hearing anything about. But it plays a role in many, many people's lives.
Well, I do love that we are in their living rooms hearing this because, like you said, these aren't topics that we normally hear loud and clear, and so we get to hear the nuances of the reasons for or against. Like for instance, when the father starts talking about his own company or even his friend, they basically say, is there's a difference between favoring your own community and keeping others out. Like wanting that similarity around you, and it just made it was so interesting to see different perspectives and how you can validate those decisions. It's fascinating.
Yeah,
Do you
right. I mean, we probably all have examples of that in our own life, right? Like when we're hiring someone, like, of course I'd want to hire a Tar Heel if I could. We have a common language. I think they're great and they're smart, and I have an affinity for the school. So, is that discrimination? When does that become, discrimination? And when does that become like affinity? And it's just, I think it just sort of, it's a nice way to be able to turn things around and say, like, okay, well, that, Indian caste system might have nothing to do with me in my life, but what are the parallels in my life or my workplace or my neighborhood? Um, and, you can always find one.
you also mentioned in your first statement about clumping in black and brown skinned people, and some people thinking that everybody should be on the same page as far as what they're supporting or what they're not supporting. But it seemed to be that there was even some racism amongst those groups as to who is top tier. I mean, that's not a good term, but you know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
how they see it. And I think it comes from that model minority terminology from the very beginning, that we're model and you're not.
Hmm.
So why did you want to address that? Because I think that was really a big hurdle that you had to get over with this family.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, some of those feelings I think come on the individual level. If someone has been raised in a certain community in a certain demographic background their whole lives and just hasn't had exposure to any other groups except on the news or on the movie screen, then it becomes a lot harder to you know pardon the phrase, but like put color around that, to really see people as individuals rather than just, however they're portrayed in the media. But I do think when people are sort of fighting to get ahead socioeconomically, and in this case, we're mostly looking at a new immigrant family who's come under, they've come under a certain premise. Like they have a vision of the American dream and they want to play by those rules and achieve those successes. But we see it in all kinds of other communities. I mean, we see in like, rural communities across America where manufacturing jobs have left. Those people are also scrambling to maintain lifestyle or get ahead or make ends meet. And it's very natural when I think there's a scarcity of spoils to start wanting to, divide, to divide and conquer, or to create that hierarchy and say, yeah, you're right. Our tier is here for whatever reasons, we were here first, or we work harder, or we're smarter, or whatever it is. Um, and then, we can lump other groups below us and use that as a way of sort of trying to climb that ladder. I think that's a sort of a natural human instinct, and it's happened throughout time and across the world. And I think it's good to be aware of it.
Absolutely. And you have this family, the mother and father, the Shaw family, just working their tails off. I mean, just nonstop. We get to see them go back from when before kids and moving forward. and we see the struggles they've had. And then come the kids and their American upbringing and this sort of tug from American ideals versus what they're used to with their traditional ideas. Um, why was that important? Because I thought that was fascinating, especially with the oldest daughter coming in. Well, really, all three of them, but talk about
Yeah.
that family dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, in this story, I think this is true in general, but in this story in particular, this family is an ecosystem. They play off each other. It's not just five individuals, it's also all those sub relationships and how they impact each other. And, I think this is something that has probably happened, again, across cultures and through generations. Those who immigrate have a different set of values and set of rules often than those who were born here, their children who were born here. um, and some of this is just generational, right? Like you could be live on the same street that you're that you grew up on, and your kids will still have differences with you. And some of it in this case is cultural, because the kids are growing up with very, sort of immersed in America. And when you add all of that, and then there's just personality on top of that, right? So when you add all these layers of, potential for differences, um, you get this, what ends up being this taut situation where, there's a particular um, circumstance where Deepa, the oldest daughter, goes, to this protest that she knows her parents would disapprove of. And when it finally, comes clean and explains that to them, they have the exact reaction that she, feared that they would. But we also, as the reader, get to see her father's perspective. He grew up in a different country, in a different time, and his experience of, protests or strikes is very different than hers. And so he's rational in his perspective too. She has a right to her perspective, and it's formed by her life experience, limited as it is. She's 16 at the beginning of the novel. Um, and he has a very rational response, based on his life experience. And it just comes to a head between the two of them when, hopefully as the reader, if I've done my job, your heart aches a little bit for both characters because you can see where they're both coming from, and yet you can see that you know, while there's goodwill toward one another because they're still part of the same family, there's a big divide, in their opinions, and you just can't sort of see how it's going to get bridged.
Well, as a parent of teenagers, you were on the money. And I
I've I've also been a parent of teenagers, so those scenes were kind of fun to write.
I think what really opened my eyes too was he was just so. I think his views also changed. We know the mom's does, but we
Yeah.
see it happen slowly. But at one point, I think it was maybe in the middle of the book when they were discussing whether Deepa should be able to stay at Chavez or should she go to the brand new, the really nice ritzy high school. And he can't even fathom why you would walk away from a place of privilege. Like it's just so inconceivable that
Yeah.
she would choose to go somewhere else. And although he was sort of convinced by the counselors, I think it
Right.
sort of blows his mind in so many ways. But then we know at the end, they give up this house, this place of, privilege, and move back to that Chavez neighborhood. So I love seeing that movement of thought throughout because it happens quite a bit. These characters moving in their opinions. And that goes for the kids too, I feel like. Which
Yeah.
character did you find the most fun to write?
Um, Probably Deepa, just because she's like this, fiery 16-year-old. And, having lived under a roof with a couple of those, I can say that it can be a little maddening as the parent, but also you kind of love to see it. Like I love to see a fierceness in my daughters and that they have strong opinions and that you engage in, dialogue and discussion and defend their points of view. And so she was fun to write.
Well, I did love Deep. I loved, I mean, really all the kids added something. Why did you
Mhm.
choose those particular personality traits? Because I think that was also important, right? Like you needed the son to
Yeah.
have a disability, a learning, social awkwardness. And then you needed this girl, the 14, was she 14? No, she's older.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She's
to be
14.
like the
Yeah.
perfect daughter, plays a sport, has the best, rich best friend. I'm assuming,
Yeah.
did you have any changes in that, or were you always, those were your three kids in this book?
Well, that's interesting. I guess I thought about them a little bit differently. I thought about, in some sense, Ajay is the pivotal character in the novel, right? Even though we probably hear the least from him. His actions set everything into motion. So, yeah, I had to construct a situation that would, in which he could kind of, believably um, do what he was doing and set the novel's events in motion. And then I thought about the sisters more as a relationship. I wanted there to be a real push and pull there, and I was trying to show the complexity of how kids can be born with a certain temperament and way of being and just go down a path, whether it's rebellious or assimilating, in their two cases. And some of that's just born into them, and they can be raised by the same people with the same values and yet choose two very different paths. And then I wanted there to be some alignment between them. I wanted them to be close sisters and then also have a bunch of differences where they're sometimes they're defending each other, sometimes they're throwing each other under the bus. um, so, those, I think those were kind of maybe the two ends of the spectrum of how I could see kids reacting to parents like this. They could, either be rebellious from the get-go or sort of like do what they need to get along to go along while behind the curtain doing whatever they want anyways. And I think I wanted to show that Deepa, while she was outwardly rebellious, had a lot of really great qualities actually and helped to educate her parents in the end. And also was willing to learn from her parents in the end. And Maya, who, yeah, nobody was worried about, turned out was, engaging in a lot of risky behavior and doing a lot of things, sort of on the subterfuge level, even though everything looked, you know, shiny and happy on the exterior. So that idea that things aren't always what they seem, um, from the outside.
Well, I also love that you gave, I know we didn't get a ton of, is it Ajay? Is that, or AJ? How do you want to say it? Ajay?
Ajay, yeah,
Ajay,
Ajay, that's
okay.
perfect.
Um, we get his perspective for a little bit of what happens between him and the police officers, but then we also, which was nice, got the police officer's view. And really,
Hmm.
there were two, but we really got the younger, the greenie or whatever, his perspective.
Yeah,
So I did read in I think in your afterward that you did have a internship or something with the Minneapolis Police Department. How did that sort
yeah.
of form your ideas here or help you write that portion of the story? Because they are completely different in a lot of ways, and sometimes they're the same, but for the most part, it is different.
Yeah, I think I mean that was really one of the instigating uh you know reasons for me to write this book. I, had that experience interning with the police department when I was 20, when I was in college, 19 actually. And so I was green and everything I saw opened my eyes. I hadn't grown up. I'd grown up in a, comfortable suburb where everything was safe and I rode my bike down the street. So, I had not seen anything gritty or urban. And I saw a lot of it that summer. And one of the things that, I was really left with was being so impressed with the police officers, with their bravery and the risks they were willing to take in their job and, the way they treated people and the way they knew the people in their neighborhoods. Um, So I came away with a very, positive opinion of law enforcement. And then when the Minneapolis Police Department was in the news, with George Floyd 30 some years later, and it was the exact same department. And I had remembered walking up the steps of that building every day. It was very disconcerting for me. I mean, it was, in a lot of ways, it was disconcerting in the way it was to most Americans who saw that video. But then I was just also trying to reconcile my personal experiences with what I was, now seeing, and so I kind of wanted to write into the complexity of that a little bit, because all the conversations I was hearing, most people don't have. Uh, for most people to have personal experience with law enforcement, it's probably not a good thing, right? um, and I had happened to have a good experience. And so I found myself in all these conversations post George Floyd, feeling like the discussions were very oversimplified. It was, this group is evil and they can do no right and they should be completely defunded. And why do we even have, and I thought, well, that's not quite right. That's not quite it. Um, it's more complicated, we have to, and I found myself going back to some of those conversations that I heard and the trainings that I sat in on, and then those like diner conversations where the cops were a little more unvarnished and they would just kind of say things that, in retrospect made me flinch a little bit. And I thought, okay, well, there's a lot of gray here, and so, and there are also varying opinions and varying types of people within the police force. So that was a big part of what I wanted to do, was just sort of, move into that gray area and say, everything's not black and white. People have different opinions. There are people with good intentions who do bad things. There are probably people with, bad intentions who do bad things. And so let's portray it a little bit more realistically and help round out that perspective of, how these problems happen. Because if you just say all the cops are evil and, the police should be abolished, we can't solve a societal problem that way. We have to understand what's actually behind things and understand that there's a lot of variance and nuance. And then you can start moving towards a solution, if it comes from training, or if it comes from mentoring, if it comes, from putting different, you know, um, systems in place, or all of the above, or, replacing pairing law enforcement with mental health experts. I mean, there are lots of potential solutions, but saying, things are black and white, I don't think leads you to them.
Was that your initial seed in starting to write this novel, or was it sort of a conglomeration of lots of things and it just that's where it ended?
It was a few different things. The idea sort of came to me, in that first year after the dawn of the pandemic, when I wasn't writing, I wasn't trying to write, but I was living and observing. And I was actually doing a lot of writing and journaling just because I knew, like everybody else, that we were living through a historical anomaly, and I wanted to document as much of it for myself as I could. So, that was one of the things that sort of planted, I would say, a question in my mind of, like, that I kept sort of turning over and over and over. And another was the rise in violence against Asian Americans, which, was the first time in my lifetime I had seen that happen. Obviously, there have been other times in this country's history when Japanese Americans, or, Chinese Americans have been targeted. But this was the first time in my lifetime I'd seen it. And it was especially striking that a lot of it was happening in the Bay Area, where I used to live, and where I'd always thought of that as like the most comfortable home for Asian Americans in the country. So, that, and then that, watching those things happen in the news, that sparked a lot of conversations within my personal, circle of friends and colleagues. And a lot of these conversations that, happened behind closed doors, and people were saying things that, they don't normally say. And so I think it was all of that sort of coming together. It was that period of turmoil and seeing how much civil unrest there was in the country and how hard it was for people to talk to one another. Um, and I sort of started to craft that conversation for myself. I didn't see it anywhere. I didn't see it in the news. I didn't see it in social media. It was not always easy to have it, with individuals. So I think this book was my way of sort of, laying out a difficult scenario and starting to have what I hope is a more nuanced conversation.
I would say the Shaw parents definitely wanted white and black because that makes it easier for them. But this book lives in the gray. And so much of the
Mhm.
conversations, the topics, everything is just right there in that muddy gray area. Did you find that difficult? I know you were saying that it was hard to find conversations there, but was it hard for you to dig into that space? And then what was the reaction to those around you when they got to read it?
I would say it was actually very cathartic to be able to write those things, because I don't necessarily agree 100% with any one character's perspective. Being able to, step into a lot of different shoes and understand a lot of different perspectives with what I would call like the best intentions. I wasn't trying to paint people as evil or good. Um, but real, and authentic and complicated and flawed, which is what I think we all are. So it was really helpful and cathartic for me to be able to write that way. Um, and I was very nervous about the book coming out and people reading it. And I will say that it was what was surprising and reassuring is when I went on the road and I was talking to, hundreds and hundreds of people from all different walks of life, and all different geographies who had read the book or were, in the process of reading it during my book tour. A lot of people felt the same way I had when I was struggling to find those conversations and when I was disappointed with the state of our discourse. And, I would say the vast majority of people felt that way. Felt like they wanted something better. They wanted a return to, the ability to disagree with your neighbor and still love them, to have a productive discussion with somebody, in your workplace without it having turn into, World War III. To be able to return to the Thanksgiving table with family members and not have it, be a disaster. So that hunger for a more productive discourse, I mean, I would like to believe that is the dominant, that's what the majority want. It's just that the people that we see portrayed in the media are on the screaming fringe. They're louder, but
Right.
they're not the majority. Um, and
Yeah, I think
so it was
clickbait.
across the political spectrum. It was across like generations. People said these things to me, and I didn't always agree with them. There was a cop, a retired sheriff that I interviewed for this book, to get, some of my details correct. And when I sent him the book before it came out, the first time he read it, he was really distressed because he thought I was, sort of jumping on this bandwagon of painting cops as being bad. And so, and I tried really hard not to do that. So it was disappointing to me that that's how we read it. So we sat down and had a dialogue. Um, and we had multiple dialogues around it. And he read it again after talking to me. And again, we're probably from two very different ends of the generational, socioeconomic, demographic, everything spectrum, but we could have, you know, we could have a discussion and listen to each other. And he pointed out some things to me that hadn't occurred to me. And I think I pointed out some things to him that he saw in a different light. And so, in the end, he said, I'm really glad you wrote this book. I'm really glad that I read it. Um, and I learned some things I wouldn't have learned otherwise. So, to me, maybe it needs to happen like that. One, well-intentioned conversation at a time. Um, But that starts in book clubs, I think. I mean, as a big book club fan, I think a lot of those conversations you can have in a safer way about fictional characters in a book club.
Absolutely. And it seems like today, all the clickbait, it's all the extremes. Like you said, it's not that majority view. And it was very
Yeah.
cathartic in some ways to read. But as Kim pointed out, reading that scene, she's a mom of a teenage boy. It was pretty frightening reading what could happen at any time to, especially a person of color, right? That that someone that's white would maybe not even have that
Yeah.
risk, and the hoodie. And anyways, it just, that part was disturbing, but it also is a great conversation to have and to understand. Um, when you were talking about the overall reaction, like talking to people across the country, right? I guess you
Hmm.
traveled lots of places.
Yeah.
Um, did anybody really, how do I want to put this? Did anybody try to, I don't know, go head to head with you, or was it pretty much a understanding conversation that they would have? I mean, you didn't have any issues on the road, did you?
No, I don't think I had any issues. I did definitely get a lot of questions. I think people in some ways, I again in this environment, people they want to understand you, right? They want to get your perspective, they want to understand what your point of view is. So I did often, or on occasion, there were people who really were pushing me to try to you know, take a side, I guess, for lack of a better word. Um, do I identify more with the cops or do I identify more with the parents? Was I trying to say so and so, about, what it means to be Black in America or what? And I just, genuinely was trying to have a multi-pronged discussion. So like I said earlier in the conversation, there's not a hidden Trojan horse character in here that's like voicing all of my opinions. So I think it's kind of funny. Sometimes I'll read reviews and people will be like, well, she obviously agrees with the daughter more than the mother. And I'm like, I mean, demographically, I have a lot more in common with the mother than the daughter, but maybe that's a sign that I can write those perspectives convincingly. So that was the only thing is I think sometimes people are so protective, and jaded and have been so hurt over things in the public, square over the last several years that they kind of wanted to pin me. They wanted to know like whose side was I on or what perspective was mine. Um, but that, I understand that instinct too, because that's how we've trained people. There's a side and you got to find your side because you got to protect yourself against the other side because everything's so combative. But I think, once, you can sort of, take down the barriers a little bit and say, hey, what I'm really trying to do is engage in this dialogue. People can go there mostly. Yeah.
Mostly. For the book club, when you brought that up, the conversations, when this paperback comes out, can you put some recipes in this book? Because sometimes the food was just so enticing, and I'm thinking, oh, if I just had that recipe. And
Oh,
of
that's a
course,
good idea.
yeah, with book clubs, it's food is an automatic. So I feel like it could be your book club edition.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We are actually just planning the paperback right now, and it's interesting. For all of my book events, I brought recipe cards that had the recipe for masala chai, the hot tea that the friends drink all the time, on the front, and then it had a chai cocktail to make with your leftover chai on the back. And for the first couple events that were local, I actually brought bottles of the chai cocktail.
It's
People
like your business in the front, party in the back. It's your
exactly. It's like this is morning, this is evening. Don't worry if have some left over. So yeah, maybe we should put a few of those recipes, and that's a great idea. I will suggest that to my publisher. We already have one of them. We already have the chai and the chai cocktail, but we probably need to put a couple other dishes in there.
Absolutely. I did notice though in the hardback that at the front of every chapter, is a drawing of a house. Why was that there? And what was your intention for that?
That was my editor's idea, and I think it was brilliant. She wanted to, there's always like, I always seem to have sections in my book, like, parts or sections, three or four or five of them. And so I think to designate those, they always want to have some sort of, art. Um, and it's really neat if that art can tell a story. So she said, like, what do you think about, putting a house on each section? And then she showed me like seven different houses, and we chose the one that we liked. That, I don't really write about the house, but I had a vision in my head of what the house did and didn't look like. So I picked the one that was, closest to that. And then it was her idea to sort of have that picture sort of slowly dissolve through each part and then have it come back in the final section, which I thought was really brilliant. And she did something similar in my last book, The Shape of Family. There's the cover art is basically three different um like stalks of wheat, but they're all different kind of grains. And there's a bird on top of it. And so that's symbolic of the four members of the family. And each of the parts is called, like, home and away and that kind of thing. And so the bird is in a different place. It's either like landing on the branch or it's flying away from the branch for each of the parts. So
See
I think
several
that's really, I can't
people.
take any credit for that, but yeah, I love
I
that
see
she does
several
that.
people going back right now and looking at at the beginning of the.
I know. You
But
wouldn't.
I agree with Jenny. I mean, the graphic was so good and
Yeah.
powerful. It really stood out. I started thinking, huh, what is, and then you kind of flip through it and it was a great, so tell your editor, great idea. Did you also get a choice for the narrator? Because I did listen to the audiobook some.
Yeah,
Okay.
I did. I had a choice of several narrators, and it was, a number of women, some of whom who had narrated previous books of mine. Um, and then Vikas Adam, who was the only male. And Vikas Adam had done um, this in my last book, The Shape of Family. He had done a very small part, which was the young son. Um, had a few chapters, and so he did just those bits, and it was probably like less than 10% of the overall book, but I thought he did such a brilliant job that I started listening to more of his, other books, and he's done a lot of fantastic books. And so I went back to my editor and I was like, all of these people are great, but do you think we could get a man to do the whole book, even though several of the, parts are women? And she said, yeah, sure, if you want. And he was, the things I liked about him were he could do very perfect pronunciations and accents and multiple accents, because there are all kinds of Indian accents. There's Northern Indian, Southern Indian, there's, British educated Indian, and, so he can do all of those perfectly. He can do women really well. He can do children really well. Like he did two teenage girls. So I think his narration is brilliant. It's the only one of my audiobooks I've actually listened to all the way through. Because usually I get to a point where I'm like, okay, this is cringy. I'm listening to my own words. I can't do this. But he really made it seem like it was like a stage performance, and I kind of lost myself in it. There were times when I would like pull into my house in the car and I'd just be sitting in the driveway like listening because I couldn't wait to see what happened. And then I'd be like, I know what happens. But so anyway, if you're an audiobook person, yeah, it sounds like
Yeah.
some of your viewers here are that they've liked it. So
Yeah,
I
I think
agree.
audiobooks help me, get in so much more literature, but every narrator is not created equal. And so for
Right.
me, I thought, oh, it's a male narrator. I wonder why she chose. But after listening to him, he's phenomenal. Like it wasn't a distraction. And sometimes I feel like that's the
Yeah.
case when a male is narrating for a woman or a child, but he was really, really good.
Right.
Elle says the same, and Kim, like it was just a great job. So kudos to you that you brought that back
Yeah.
up because he's phenomenal.
Yeah. And amazingly, another point is that several people have said to me, wow, I loved all the narrators in your book. And I'd be like, yeah, that's one person. And then I went through and counted the characters, because you have like part of the copy ed process, you have like all the characters' names and ages to make sure you haven't like given two characters the same name or something. And there were 26 voices he had to do.
Yeah,
It was
it's
pretty
impressive.
pretty impressive. Yeah.
Okay, I have an off the wall question for you because
All
you
right.
did bring up Bollywood in this book. Are you a big Bollywood fan? Like, and it has it
I
had an effect on you, or is that just part of one of your characters that you want to?
Yeah, no, I haven't. I'm actually have probably have seen the least amount of Bollywood films of anybody I know. I'm sorely lacking in that department. It's kind of like why I can't watch a soap opera. Like I can't suspend my disbelief enough to go with it. I just I just get taken out a lot. Like, oh, they're bursting into song in the middle of a lake. That's not going to happen. Um, so no, I haven't. Occasionally, I mean, and I have some friends that are very avid Bollywood aficionados, and they'll say, "Okay, this one you have to watch." Like and on occasion I watch those, and I agree, but it's like once every 3 or 5 years. It's not very often.
Well, I do have some rapid fire questions for you. And
Okay,
audience out there, readers, if y'all have questions, be thinking of those. But we're going to get started. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Favorite Indian dish? There was a, say again.
No, that's really hard. How do I pick one?
This
So
is not
I'm gonna,
rapid fire. This is not rapid
okay,
fire, Shilpi.
okay. I'm gonna say tepla, which is a flatbread.
Okay. If you did have to recommend one Bollywood film, what would it be?
Um, I'm not good at this. I
That's okay. Do you want to pass?
Yeah, I'm gonna pass on that one.
Okay.
I'll
You're
hear
my, that's the first time I've
it from
had
all
an
my friends.
offer pass, but I loved it. Okay. California or Canada?
For what?
So you choose. This is your rapid
Live. Okay,
fire.
California to live and Canada to visit.
Perfect. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird.
What's your top song on your music playlist right now?
Oh, I don't know, but I'm gonna say something Taylor Swift.
Because you have teenagers. Do you listen to anything when you write or you edit?
No, silence.
Total silence. And what author would you like to meet if you could?
And Patchett.
Nice. All right, you're off the fire, and we can move on to the audience's questions. All these readers, do y'all have any questions? Um, let's see. We have a comment here. Kim said your portrayal of Orange County was so on point. I couldn't stop reading because it was so accurately represented. How long have you been in Orange County?
So I don't live in Orange County. I
Where
live
do
in
you
San
live?
Diego.
Okay, okay,
San Diego. So I live closer to the Mexican. I'm like 30 minutes from the Mexican border.
okay.
Um, but Orange County I've never lived there. I have visited a few times. I did a lot of reading about it, and then I went back and I have like driven around a bunch of streets and neighborhoods to kind of get the feel for what I was trying to write. But it's more of an arm's length relationship I have with Orange County.
Selena says, I loved this book, a great read. If this has already been covered, and it has, but I think she has a little bit different perspective. It covers the idea and the myth of the model minority. What is your viewpoint on this topic? Is it a myth or where do you see it lying?
Um, I think it's a myth in the sense that anything that, sort of functions as a stereotype flattens people in a group. I mean, especially one that is as vast and diverse as, South Asians or East Asians. So yeah, I think it's a myth that has been self-serving in some ways. Not all myths are not helpful, but it's also been limiting. And I think
Yeah.
it's also hurt our overall sense of what it means to be a minority in this country or what it means to be an immigrant.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Carol has a great question. How did you go about researching the caste system? Did you have to do a deep dive for that?
I did. I knew almost nothing about it. So, I interviewed probably the world's current most foremost academic on the caste system, a guy named Suraj Yengde, who teaches at Harvard and Oxford and is himself from the caste of Dalits, which is the historically the lowest caste in India. So he helped me understand some things quite a bit. I did a bunch of reading, obviously. I studied all of those Silicon Valley lawsuits that, because they were sort of the modern manifestation of caste discrimination. And then I wrote the passages that are in the book, and I ran them by several of my friends who are, I would say, like my generation, but grew up in India and now live here. And so I had them kind of read through those things and say, how would you round out these conversations? Does this ring true? Is this the way people would talk about it or not? So it was kind of a few different levels.
Great conversations. All right, Rebecca has a live question. If you'll unmute. Rebecca, are you with us? There we go.
I am.
Go ahead.
I'm really curious about Ajay's neurodivergence. Did you choose for him to be neurodivergent to make sense of his perspective and his actions? And or was this part of a commentary on assimilation or neurodivergent people being held to neurotypical standards and thus being marginalized?
Mm. I would say I had less of an agenda in creating those characteristics for him. I was trying to construct a family that had a lot of differences within it, whether they were temperamental or, in his case, neurological. So I wanted there to be very different kids who behaved differently, and that was one of the aspects in which he could be different from his siblings. And I also did want to create a bunch of sort of questions and gray area around the incident at the beginning of the novel, or it's not the beginning of the novel, but it's the event that sets the story in motion. I didn't want it again to be black and white where he absolutely did something wrong and the police were right, or he absolutely didn't do anything wrong and the police overreacted. I wanted there to be some uncertainty, some gray area, the moment when you find out he actually kind of did do something that gave the cops a reason to stop him. I want your stomach to fall because you can tell he's an innocent kid and he's young and didn't intend to do anything wrong, but he still effectively did something, that caused the police to stop him. So I think, part of it was I wanted it, and it was also a nice opportunity to explore how the parents think about that idea of having to be perfect, like you have to you have to behave perfectly, according to the rules. This whole family has to like march in step and climb the ladder, and there wasn't as much tolerance for anything that sort of didn't align with that. So it was another way of pushing the parents on their thinking too, to have to sort of think about their son in a way that was not what they had come to the country thinking they were going to do.
Yeah, I found this very fascinating because I wasn't quite sure when they were talking about, did they just not want there to be a label on their son? But in a lot of ways, they just don't want to cause waves. They want a compliant nature. But then you think, well, is that more of a cultural thing? Is it the Shaw
Mhm.
family that doesn't want to recognize that he has, less than perfect? Or do you think that that's a broader idea?
I think it is largely a cultural thing. I think there's a lot of in South Asian culture, there's probably a lot of emphasis or intolerance for things that are outside of the norm. I mean, this is why, there's an old joke that growing up in an Indian family, there's only four career options. It's like doctor, engineer, lawyer, and failure. So, um, I think there's, some of it is cultural. And I think some of it is just what can an immigrant family afford to do when they already look different, when they're already starting from a different rung on the ladder, when they're already having to prove themselves and face discrimination and, don't have family support and all of that. Can they also afford to accommodate, things within their family? Obviously, that's, by the end of the story, they think about it differently. But in the beginning, they're just, they're triaging, the most important elements to get ahead in their lives.
I agree. Rebecca made a great point that being neurodivergent is not, quote, less than perfect. It's a different form of perfect. But that family appearance was so important to them. And anything outside of that that might draw attention or, was just not to be even addressed. So thank you for bringing up that great question, Rebecca.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that term perfect was more from their perspective again. I mean, I think there were a lot of differences within their family, many of which they thought were not perfect, but again, it wasn't, it's like their daughter choosing to go to a different school in their view, was not perfect either, but it was obviously a great choice.
Adele wants to know, is there going to be a movie? And just because you mentioned that the narrator like got you so into that scene, what do you think?
Mhm.
Any chance?
There could be. There has been some interest in optioning the film rights, so we'll see. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned for sure. All right, Sonia, you want to go ahead and ask your question? You'll need to unmute. There you go.
Well, it wasn't so much a question. I just wanted to say that I don't think that the issue with him being neurodivergent was, the parents wanting to ignore it was just because of their culture. As a teacher, I found that parents in general don't want to acknowledge if there's anything wrong. When you try to speak to them about your child is gifted and talented, but at the same time, you need to realize she's having problems here and there, and they don't want to, especially parents that have honor students, they don't want to acknowledge it. But I thought you did a beautiful job of showing the mother, especially, wanting to smother and mother him, but agonizing over wanting him to be the young boy she wanted. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, books are always better than the movie, but it would be nice to see it. I do have another question. Are you writing anything now? And if so, is there anything you could share with us?
I'm not writing now. No. I mean, I have been working on an idea for a novel that requires a lot of research. I have been I think so. I've written four books now, and I've had this idea since I published my second book, since after my second book. So like half my writing career ago. And I slowly work on it in between other books. Like when I'm not ready to write something, but I still want to kind of stay engaged, I do a bunch of research, I take notes, I start crafting storylines. But it's kind of like this, like it's such a big project that it's intimidating to just like spend all my time on it. So right now I'm kind of enjoying, reading a bunch of my accumulated research books and kind of like playing with that idea a little bit, but I don't know if it'll be the next book novel I write or something else will come along.
This is exciting. It's been percolating quite a while.
Yeah.
Since you have had more time to read, can you recommend any books for us?
Sure, yes. So one book I read this year, after many years of thinking it was too big for me to read, was Shantaram. And I highly recommend it. I think it is like 900 pages or something. And so I read it slowly in the background, like a few pages every morning, while I was reading other books, the rest of the time. And I absolutely loved it. It's an amazing epic. And I think it has been made into a movie, but I didn't watch it until I had to read the book first. So now I'll probably watch the movie. Another one I loved was Day by Michael Cunningham, who's one of my favorite authors. It's sort of like a COVID novel, so if you're not ready to read one of those, maybe put it, on the back of your shelf. But I thought it was really brilliant and funny. Um, and I read Erasure by Percival Everett. Again, before I watched American Fiction, I wanted to read the book. Those are different names, but the same story. And I thought that was brilliant too. So there are a couple.
Well, thank you so much for that. We'll get started on that 900 pages tomorrow morning. Well, Shilpi, thank you so much, first of all, for starting this conversation and continuing it and keeping it in the, in the light, because there are so many topics that people just avoid. And this is one, so many of these within this book need to be discussed. So thank you for making us a part of that conversation. Thank you for joining us, readers. Thank you so much for joining us. If you can, check out her Instagram. Maybe we'll see more about that movie possibility there. She also has a great website, and I think one upcoming event in 2025 is listed already. If you can follow me on the LBs, I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and like I said, on YouTube. October is going to be filled with books that yesterday's birthday boy, Stephen King, loved. So I want to give you a little bit of info on that. On Sunday, October 6th, we're going to be in conversation with Amiko Jean, who has the best review from Stephen King. It says, The Return of Ellie Black is a page-turning suspense novel, a shrewd character study, and a captivating mystery all at the same time. The last 50 pages are magnetic. I couldn't put it down until I'd experienced every last twist and turn. I'm saying, y'all, you better get on this one. Then in 2 more weeks following that, it's Amy Tintera's turn for Listen for the Lie. Hers will be on October 20th. And that's for her GMA book club pick. And his quote on that one is, "It's a world-class whodunit." So I think we have lots of reading homework to do, including that 900 pager. We're going to get on it. But I forgot to give y'all the idea of what the Return of Ellie Black is. The description is, what if you thought you murdered your best friend, and if everyone else thought so too? And what if the truth doesn't matter? Lucy's forced to go return to the place she vowed never to set foot in again and solve her friend's murder, even if she was the one that did it. So perfect for those fall vibes. October's coming, so get ready. But as always, I'm just so excited for everybody to be here and that we could talk with you, Shilpi, and talk about spoilers and have these important conversations. Guys, if y'all have an author that you would like to hear, this one was on recommendation. Thank you so much. I know some of you were really excited to hear from her, and I was too. So thank y'all so much for recommending this book to me, and for recommending this chat. Like I said, check out YouTube. I'm sure there's some more books that you have read that you can check out those. And as always, y'all keep this conversation going. Hopefully you can invite book club members to join in, and we're just going to keep on recommending it. So Shilpi, thank you so much. I hope y'all have a great day, fabulous week, and happy reading.
Thank you all. Great
Good
to
night,
see
everybody.
you.